Have you ever found that someone who should be motivated in a situation isn't? If you have, if you've ever wondered what's going on, then one of the most valuable models for you is going to be Victor Vroom's expectancy theory. It arguably is one of the least understood and most valuable models for any manager in the field of motivation. And that's what we'll look at in this video. Victor Vroom's expectancy theory of motivation is probably less well known than it should be because he expressed it in mathematical terms. He wrote an equation for it, and people don't like equations, so I am not going to give you an equation till the very end of this video. By then you'll already understand the theory, and the equation will just complete the picture for you. To help you understand the theory, I'm going to consider a very simple example. I have a car. I want to clean it. But I'm not going to do it myself because I've got 4 children and any one of them could clean it for me. And each of them could do a good job. So I go to my older son. And I ask my older son if he will clean the car. I promise him a great reward if he does. But he says, no, I don't think I want to clean the car for you because every time I've cleaned the car for you in the past, you've always found fault with the work I've done. You've never been happy with it. It always just gets me frustrated. So ask someone else. What's going on? Why doesn't my son? What's going on? Why doesn't my son want to clean the car? Well, Victor Vroom would have described this in terms of expectancy. My son doesn't expect that if he puts in the work, he will get the outcome for which he would be rewarded. If expectancy is low, then so is motivation. So I go to my older daughter and I ask her if she wants to clean the car, promising her a great reward if she does. Well, Dad, she says, every time I clean the car, I do a good job and you always appreciate the work I've done. But here's the thing, you always promise to get me a present and you always seem to forget. So you know what? I don't think I want to do it. Ask someone else. Now what's going on with my older daughter isn't about expectancy. She expects that if she puts in the work, she will get the result. The problem is what Vroom would describe as instrumentality. My older daughter doesn't believe that getting the result that's required will be instrumental in her receiving the reward. If instrumentality is low, then so is motivation. It's like a chain. Expectancy has to be strong, and so does instrumentality. If either link in the chain is weak, then so will motivation be. So let's go to my younger son. I ask him if he wants to clean the car. And he says, well, Dad, every time I do the work, I get a great result and you're always happy with it. And whenever I do a good job, you always buy me the present you promised. The thing is, Dad, there's nothing I particularly want at the moment. What I really want to do is spend some time with my friends. So the first 2 links in the chain for my younger son are complete. He does the work, he gets the result. High level of expectancy. He also believes that if he gets the result, it will be instrumental in him achieving the reward that is promised. So that's high instrumentality. But the problem for him is what Victor Vroom would call the valence. The satisfaction that he will feel at receiving the reward. For him, either the value of the reward is too low, or even if I'm offering an extravagant reward for doing the work, it will not satisfy him enough. If the valence is low, the perceived satisfaction with the reward that is promised is too low, then so is motivation. 3 links in the chain all have to be complete. And that's Vroom's model of motivation. It doesn't tell us anything about what motivates us. It tells us about how that chain of motivation works. The chain runs from effort to performance, to outcome, to the satisfaction or the value we feel in the reward we get. And if any link in that chain is weak, then so is motivation. And we can represent that, as Victor Vroom did, as a simple equation. The motivation that we feel is the expectancy times the instrumentality times the valence. And simple maths tells us that if any of those terms is too low, then motivation will be low. And if any of those terms is zero, then there will be no motivation. So how does this help us as managers? It helps us as managers because, firstly, we have to set work that our team members and colleagues believe is possible. They have to believe that with the resources they have, the skills, the knowledge, the time you've allocated, they can do the work and achieve the result that is expected of them. If they don't believe that, they have low expectancy. Secondly, they have to believe that if you make some promise of rewards, or if your organisation makes a promise of a reward, that they will actually receive that reward. And how many times have we encountered organisations that promise pay rises or bonuses and don't fulfil on those promises? And of course that poisons motivation down the line because of instrumentality. And thirdly, as a manager, if you are going to motivate me to do something, you have to make me an offer of a reward that will give me a sense of satisfaction, will have a high valence. If I don't anticipate being pleased by the reward, then I won't be motivated. That's the chain of motivation. That is Victor Vroom's expectancy model of motivation. There are two kinds of models of motivation. Firstly, there are process models of how we are motivated. And secondly, there are content models of what motivates us. In this video, I want to go to the roots of the modern research into motivation and look at arguably the earliest understanding of the process of motivation. In the last years of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, Frederick Winslow Taylor undertook a large amount of research into what made people effective and efficient in the workplace. That led him to the idea of scientific management. That if you treated work as a process, and if you treated people as, if you like, cogs in the machine that makes the process work, then you can make that process as efficient as possible by studying how people do things and by tweaking each element of that process. Now, Taylor's work was filled with problems and challenges, but it did lead to a revolution in management and management thinking. And many of the contributions that are subsequently made to scientific management are important today. But for us, in thinking about motivation, we need to take a look at one of Taylor's followers, a chap called Elton Mayo, who looked to see the effect of one particular tweak on the way people worked. In the late 1920s, Mayo conducted a series of experiments with something like 20,000 workers at Western Electric Company's Chicago plant. And he was interested in the effects of light levels on workforce productivity. What he found was that when he studied the workforce and interviewed them and then increased the light levels, productivity increased. So he reset the light levels, consulted the staff, and then lowered the light levels. And what he found was that productivity increased. Almost anything he did to the light levels within a certain reasonable range, productivity increased. Now, scientific management said that if you could get the light level exactly right, then you could get the best results from the workforce. What Mayo found was that it seemed to be that the light levels that they had were exactly the worst possible light levels, because whatever you did improved productivity. Mayo thought about this and realised in the early 30s that actually it wasn't the light level that was important, it was consulting the workforce. And this led Mayo to abandon scientific management and be what many people think of as the founder of humanistic management. Now, actually, I would reject that Mayo was the founder of humanistic management. We can go further back to Mary Parker Follett and the work she did, and possibly further back than that. But what Mayo did was he rejected the view that external circumstances on their own dictate productivity. What is far more important is how people feel in the workplace. And when our managers, our leaders consult us and take our opinions into account, then we are motivated and we improve our performance levels, our productivity and our efficiency. So this simple video has one simple message. If you want to increase performance in the workplace, you need to motivate people. And if you want to motivate people, you have to recognize that they are humans. And as humans, each one has individual wants and needs, and we all have a desire and a need to be listened to and engaged with one-on-one. There will be plenty more videos in which we look at other aspects of the process of motivating. But this one is at the core of it. The process of motivation is the process of working with people. One of the best known and most fundamental process models of motivation was developed by Douglas McGregor. And in it, he put forward two theories of motivation that he asserts managers can choose between. What he called Theory X and Theory Y. In this video, we're going to understand what Theory X and Theory Y are and how they apply in the workplace. When I was a middle manager, I worked for a number of senior managers and leaders, and two of them exemplify the characteristics of Theory X managers and Theory Y managers. And I'm going to call them Richard and Julian. Richard was without a doubt a Theory X manager. The way he chose to manage people like me and my colleagues was very much according to what Douglas McGregor would have described as Theory X management. A Theory X manager assumes that people only work because they have to. We don't want to work, we'd rather be doing other things, and therefore we could be a little work shy. The only reason we come to work is to earn money, and therefore we'll do as little as we can in order to retain our jobs and earn the money we need. Consequently, if you want to motivate us, you have to give us a good reason to do things. And therefore, Richard's approach was very much what you might describe as the carrot and the stick. He would impel us to do things either by offering us promises, sometimes extravagant promises of reward, or, if that didn't seem to be working, threats of punishment and sanction. Richard was not a pleasant person to work for, I have to say, and his style of management felt very old-fashioned. On the other hand, Julian exemplified what is very much the Theory Y approach to management. Douglas McGregor suggested that Theory Y managers made a completely different set of assumptions about how people could be motivated. And these were very much the assumptions that Julian seemed to make. He seemed to assume that whilst we might have preferred not to come to work, since we did have to come to work, we wanted to do our very best. In fact, for many of us, coming to work was a pleasure. We enjoyed the work we did and we wanted to do well. We wanted to bring our creativity, our enthusiasm and our passion to the jobs we did. And therefore, the best way to motivate us was to give us the best possible opportunity to do just that, to be creative, to take the initiative. He would give responsibility and give trust. As a Theory Y style of manager, Julian, I have to say, was a pleasure to work for. Theory X and Theory Y are two sets of assumptions that managers make about the staff who work for them. And whilst no individual staff member is going to conform entirely to Theory X or entirely to Theory Y at all times, what he suggested was that within a prevailing culture, one theory of management and motivation was likely to be more effective than the other. But McGregor went further because he was very much a man of the humanistic approach to management. He suggested that Theory X was old-fashioned, out-of-date, a thing of the 19th and early 20th century, an artifact of pre-industrial management and early industrial management that had its last knockings with the scientific management approach. For the mid and late 20th century, McGregor saw that Theory Y was going to be the way to go. And we certainly find that in today's modern world of knowledge workers bringing their intelligence, bringing their enthusiasm to work, Theory Y is likely to be your best bet. Now, it's certainly true that there are other styles of management that are available. In fact, towards the end of his life, McGregor was working on a Theory Z approach, which William Uchi picked up later and described very much in terms of what he was observing of then Japanese management styles, which were paternalistic in some ways. They were very much offering a framework and a structure for staff to work in, like Theory X, but gave huge amounts of respect to those staff like Theory Y. And other theories have evolved. But what do Theory X and Theory Y mean for us as modern day managers? I think they remind us that there are two extremes of a spectrum of management styles and of motivational styles that we can apply. And whilst no one model is going to work for every individual, you will be successful if you choose a style that is appropriate to each individual and to the culture within which you work. And you vary that style along the spectrum according to circumstances. So, Theory X and Theory Y. Are they useful? Yes, they are, but they're not very much the modern styles of motivation theory. In fact, more modern approaches like self-determination theory of Ryan and Decci take elements of Theory X and Theory Y. They take elements of many of the older models, and you can see the echoes within them. However, as someone who is learning about management and trying to build up management knowledge, I would say that Theory X and Theory Y and the ideas of Douglas McGregor are very much foundational. We'll be moving on in other videos to look at other models of motivation. But for now, recognise the extent to which Theory X and Theory Y may be appropriate in your organisation and apply elements of them accordingly. John Stacy Adams' equity theory of motivation is easy to sum up. At its heart, equity theory says we are motivated when we feel that our circumstances are fair, and we are demotivated when we feel they are unfair. Human beings are wired for fairness. But as you'd expect, there is a little more to it than that, and this is what we'll look at in this video. For John Stacy Adams, who was an industrial psychologist at the General Electric Company, what matters most in terms of workplace motivation is the comparison between the outcomes that we receive, the rewards of doing our work, and the effort or work we put in. When we perceive that the outcomes are fair in comparison to the work we've done, then we'll be motivated. Otherwise, we will not. But have you ever noticed that some people can be perfectly well remunerated and yet not be satisfied with their rewards because they look over their shoulder to the colleague next to them who's doing the same job but receiving a slightly better remuneration package? Or perhaps they look over their other shoulder to a colleague who's earning just as much as they are but doesn't seem to be working as hard. It's that sense of fairness or unfairness that drives our motivation rather than the absolute reward, oftentimes. So equity theory is all about how we, as workers, assess the fairness of the rewards we get for the work that we do. There are three important components to equity theory, and the first of them is known as equity norm, and it's the simplest one. People expect a fair reward for the work they put in. If they don't get what they consider to be a fair reward, then they will be unhappy. The second principle is known as social comparison. Simply stated, people evaluate whether the rewards they're getting are fair by comparing the rewards that I'm getting with the rewards that you're getting, and comparing the work that I do with the work that you do. And if the ratio of outcome to work is the same or better for me, then I'll feel pleased. If it's less, then I will be upset. Of course, if it is too much more for me, then I may feel a little guilty. And that takes us to our third principle. The third principle is that employees who perceive that they are not being treated fairly will try to redress the balance. And there are two ways that we can do this. The obvious thing is to tailor the amount of work we do to our perception of the reward. So if we feel we are not being rewarded enough, we will reduce the amount of work we put in order to feel that we're getting a fair recompense. If, on the other hand, we feel we're being over-rewarded, then the guilt may well drive us to work that much harder. The second approach to redressing the balance is known as cognitive distortion, or sometimes cognitive reframing. And in cognitive distortion, what we do is we mentally distort our perception of either the work that we do or the rewards that we're getting, so that they appear to have a different magnitude or scale to give us a sense that things are fair. For example, if initially we may feel that we are being over-rewarded, in our minds we might play up the amount of work we're doing to feel that we've earned that high level of reward. If, on the other hand, we feel that we are under-rewarded, we may play up the value of the reward we receive or play down the value of the work we do in order to feel more comfortable with the situation. Now, what does this mean for you as a manager? Well, firstly, you have to recognise that your perception of the values of work people do and the reward they get may not match their perceptions. Equity theory works on perceived values, not on real values. And therefore, two workers who are earning the same and doing exactly the same work may have different perceptions of the equity of their reward, simply because they may have different expectations, different upbringings, different needs. One may find the work to be harder than the other finds it. Another important thing to be aware of as a manager, although it's often more important at senior levels in the organisation, is a recognition that, particularly for organisations which span multiple countries or multiple regions in a large country, the value of money, its buying power, may be very different in different places, and therefore organisations and managers as advocates for people within their organisations may need to tailor the rewards they offer to where people are based, where they live and work, according therefore to the cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of clothing, education, healthcare, and all of those things. Another important thing for organisations to be aware of is the sense of equity, particularly within some cultures, of senior managers and the highest up in the organisation earning substantially more than junior people within the organisation. And pay disparity between the different levels of the organisation is an important measure for many organisations, particularly global ones. And in some cultures, a disparity that would be accepted elsewhere is seen as unfair. And another thing that immediately comes to mind in thinking about that is in many cultures, there are differences between the pay that men and women receive for doing the same job. Now, in many cultures, pay gaps based on gender alone are illegal, but the reality is that they persist. Be very careful. Certainly in jurisdictions where there is legislation, you need to be scrupulous about this. But what I would say is if two people are doing the same job, they should be remunerated the same, regardless of their gender, their race, their cultural background, or anything else. Another thing for you to be aware of, particularly if you receive complaints or representations from members of your team, is that when people compare themselves with colleagues, the assumptions they make about the remuneration and the terms and the level of work that their colleagues do may be distorted. They may be just plain wrong, because the reality is very few people are prepared accurately to divulge their remuneration. They don't like to discuss in detail the work they do and the reward they get for it. So if I feel that I'm not being fairly remunerated compared to my colleague, it may be that I just don't understand properly the work my colleague does and the remuneration they receive. Finally, there is a calculated element to this. Some employees will want to adjust the amount of work they do, knowing that it will impact the remuneration they receive. And as long as they feel that the adjustments go hand in hand, and if I reduce my workload, I will reduce my salary by a fair amount, that will be a trade-off that they will willingly accept. A lot of people these days prefer to work part-time, particularly if they have a family or other commitments or a hobby they want to pursue. If I know I can move from 5 days a week working to 4 days a week working and receive 80% of the remuneration, then that will seem fair. If, on the other hand, my organisation insists on reducing my remuneration not by 20% but by 30%, then I will feel cheated in a decision that I may have to make for family circumstances or may want to make for personal reasons. The next thing to look at are some examples of the inputs or the work that we do and the outputs or the outcomes that people get for the work they do, so that you can get a sense of what's going on when people make these mental calculations of fairness or equity. Some of the inputs include things like time and effort and loyalty, experience, commitment, perhaps educational background or other investments we've made in our career in the past, qualifications, our general ability, our willingness to be flexible, our tolerance for setbacks and discomforts in the workplace, our enthusiasm. Possibly there are family or personal sacrifices we have to make in order to do the job that we're doing, perhaps support that we give to our organisation and to our co-workers. Outcomes are what we get for doing the work. The important ones are, of course, the positive outcomes, the things that we do the work for, the rewards we get, but recognise there can be some negative outcomes. Losing time, which we could see as an input, but it could also be seen as an outcome. But some of the most important positive outcomes that people exchange for the commitment, the inputs they give, include our salary, our pension arrangements, healthcare arrangements, job security, expenses to cover the costs that we incur, recognition, learning opportunities, growth in our reputation and personal brand, responsibility that we're granted, sense of achievement and learning new stuff, simple praise and thanks from our managers. The last component of equity theory that I want to discuss here are the 4 sources of comparison that people make when evaluating the fairness of their condition. The first of these is self-inside. Basically, I'm comparing what I get in terms of rewards and recognition with the work that I do. I'm comparing my own perception of the value of the work I put in to the value of the rewards I get. The second is self-outside. And this is the kind of comparison people make when they get itchy feet and they're thinking about trading up their current job for another. Self-outside is the comparison of the work I'm doing now with the rewards I would get if I were doing it in some other organisation. I may recognise that I'm getting the right remuneration, self-inside, compared to the work I'm doing here based on the remuneration structures of this organisation. But if I work in another organisation which pays better or recognises my work more highly, then I could do better. The third form of comparison I can make is others inside. I compare the work that I do with colleagues within my organisation and the remuneration and the rewards and the outcomes I get with the rewards, remuneration and outcomes of other people in my organisation. If I see that I am getting rewarded and recognised to a different extent than my colleagues, then I feel a sense of unfairness. And another trigger for people wanting to leave their organisation is others outside. I look at the work that I'm doing and the outcomes I'm getting within my organisation, and then I look at former colleagues, friends, business contacts who are doing similar work in other organisations and getting different levels of recognition, reward, remuneration and outcome. Those 4 sources of comparison can all lead to a sense that I'm doing okay, or I'm not getting a fair reward for the work that I'm putting in. John Stacy Adams' equity theory is simple. It says that human beings are motivated by perceptions of fairness and demotivated by a sense of unfairness. If you as a manager are not aware of how people feel in terms of fairness or unfairness, then you will not be in control of their motivation. One idea that is considered far too rarely in thinking about motivation is the role that goals play in motivation at work. So in this video, we'll look at Edwin Locke's goal-setting theory. Our intention to achieve a goal is an important component of workplace motivation. People strive to achieve the goals that they set themselves. And this was the idea that Edwin Locke had in the 1960s. His basic idea was a chain of motivation that started with our personal values and then led to our emotions and our desires. That led to us setting goals, things that we wanted to achieve, intentions, if you like. These goals then lead us or motivate us to take action. And it's those actions that manifest in our workplace performance. That has consequences and it leads to feedback. And the feedback loop then leads to further enhanced or diminished motivation. There's been a lot of research into goal setting, but one thing seems to come out, which is that goal setting does actually work. However, In a famous set of experiments by Albert Bandura and Daniel Trevone, they found that goal setting works, but it works even better if it is supported by constant, accurate feedback about our performance. So if goal setting does work, what are the features of effective goal setting as far as motivation is concerned? For motivating goals, the first feature that's really important is that they are specific. General goals like to do your best or to improve your performance tend not to produce high levels of motivation because our brain, it's not really sure what it is we're aiming at, and so the motivation diminishes if we don't get absolutely clear evidence that we're doing really well. But since the goal is fluffy and fuzzy, we're almost certainly not going to get that evidence. And the second thing is the goals need not only to be specific, but also challenging, stretching us to the limits of our capabilities or close to them. Not so far beyond that we end up anxious, but not so close that there's nothing really to motivate us. Because lots of other motivational theorists, from David McClelland to Ryan Andecci to Daniel Pink, have shown us that actually achieving something worthwhile is highly motivating. The third important characteristic of effective motivational goals is that they must be supported by a commitment from the owner to achieve them. It's no good being given goals and not committing to them. If you're setting goals, look the person in the eye and ask them, are they committed to achieving them? And if you get an answer that is anything other than an unambiguous yes, then there's a real chance that those goals won't be motivating. The best way to achieve commitment is to seek participation from the owner of the goal in goal setting. And of course, the ideal is that we set our own goals. But of course, there is a spectrum from autonomous self-generated goals from a member of staff all the way to manager-imposed goals, which are not going to be successful unless supported by effective extrinsic motivational rewards or indeed punishments. So if you can get someone to participate in setting their own goals and making sure that they are stretching but realistic, you'll give yourself a good chance of setting motivating goals too. There are three other things to consider. It tends to be the case that goals are more motivating when we make them public. And there are a number of apps now which help us to achieve our goals, particularly habit change goals like exercise or diet related goals, that work by making your goals public. The more you commit your goals in public and share them with people around you, the more motivating they are. Because of course, loss of face and being seen to break your commitment are important demotivating factors, and therefore we're motivated to avoid them. Next, it is important in setting effective goals that the owner of the goal has a high measure of control over the outcome. If you set yourself a goal, or you are set a goal where you don't feel in control of the outcome, and Victor Vroom showed us this with his expectancy theory, then you can hardly be motivated. There's nothing that you can do or little that you can do to influence the outcome, and therefore why should you put in the effort? And the final factor is timely and accurate feedback. The results of the experiment that Bandura and Trevone conducted. If you get good quality feedback, if you can generate your own feedback rather than have it handed to you by your manager, then you will find that more motivating and the goal more effective. Before we wrap up on Locke's goal-setting theory, it's important to note the part that culture plays. Locke's theory seems to work very well in North American, Northern European, Anglophone cultures where achievement is considered to be valuable and high performance at work is highly valued and the rewards that come from it are highly valued, and to a large extent where workplace and social cultures create a measure of distance between managers and their staff in the sense that staff have high levels of autonomy. It seems that goal setting as a motivator works less well in cultures where these things aren't true, where workers feel very much dependent on their managers and supervisors for direction, and where personal achievement, high levels of performance are not valued so highly in society. So in places like South America, Latin European countries, Middle Eastern countries, you may find that goal setting is less of a motivator than it is in North American, Northern European, Anglophone countries. So to end this short video on Locke's goal setting theory of motivation, I'd like to give you a quote from Edwin Locke himself, which sums up the way that he sees this theory. Locke said that goal setting is more appropriately viewed as a motivational technique rather than as a formal theory of motivation. So, it's a technique. It cannot hurt to apply it, set people goals, conform those goals to the 6 criteria I've given you, and it will add to the level of motivation in many cases. But one thing is sure, if you do set realistic goals and give people control over the outcomes, it is likely that it will never inhibit motivation. So goal setting is a powerful tool in your motivational toolkit. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.